I tried making this hat only using tools and materials you can find easily. I hope you enjoy this video and give hat making a try. Instead of Buckram used in traditional hat making, I used Pellon sew-in interfacing, ultra firm sew-in stabilizer. You also need millinery wires. They're covered in cotton and come in several sizes. It was easy enough to find them online on sites like Etsy and Amazon. I bought 2 sizes to see what I liked. I think I liked the thicker one for most of the places, but I think the thinner one would come in handy for smaller details. To prepare the pattern, I cut off all the seam allowances from my existing pattern. I did this because I don't want thick interfacing to be in the seam allowance as it would be too bulky. To make your fedora hat pattern from scratch, check out this video on my channel. If you want to replicate an existing hat, check out this video. This interfacing feels like a stiff felt fabric. There is no glue on it because it is sew-in type. Trace around the pattern with a pencil, making sure to mark center front and center back. There I realized that I could save some interfacing by placing the top inside the brim. You cannot erase the markings, but I was going to cover it with dark colored corduroy, so I just ignored it. I added some seam allowance on one short end of the side crown piece, so I can overlap the 2 sides to make a circle. Here are all the pieces cut from the interfacing. Here you can see that I added seam allowance on the inner edge of the brim, but I decided to later cut it off. Now I'm going to sew wires to the outside edges of the hat pieces. I folded the beginning of the wire so it's not pokey. And place the wire under the sewing machine foot. But before start sewing, put on the safety glasses so even if you hit the wire with a needle and break the needle, you won't lose an eye. Start slowly by moving the machine with the hand wheel. Go super slow to make sure the width of the zigzag stitches is just right and hitting fabric right next to the wire but not the wire itself. Backstitch a little to secure the beginning and start sewing. When you pass the folded part of the wire, you need to adjust the width of the zigzag stitch. Once you're confident with the position of the wire and the width of zigzag stitches, you can start sewing faster. But there is no need to go fast, just take your time so you don't break the needle. Overlap a couple inches to finish the round. I cut the wire and folded the end again. Adjust the width of zigzag stitches again to sew over the bulky part. Sew the wire on the inner curve of the brim. This is optional, but I think it helps for the brim to stay extra flat. I thought the folded end of the wire looked too bulky, so at the end of this round, I didn't fold them and just sewed over it many times to cover the end with thread. I think I like this better. Align the center back lines of the side crown and sew with zigzag stitches. This was pretty awkward to do, so you can also hand stitch like this. I can also attach the wire with hand stitch. I decided to use thinner wire for the crown. And I used blanket stitch and button thread to attach the wire. It's hard to see the white wire on the white base, but the wire is attached to the bottom of the crown side and also around the crown top. Now I hand stitch the crown top to the crown side. You can cover the separate pieces with fabric first and then assemble the covered pieces. But this time I decided to assemble the crown base together first. Use button thread or any other thick hand stitching thread doubled up, sew right under the wire. It's like you're wrapping the wires together. This is a time-consuming process, so turn on your Netflix and don't forget to wear your thimble. For your outside fabric, 100% wool, velvet, or corduroy with a little bit of stretch work really well. I picked stretch corduroy from Joann. You need to add seam allowances this time. Sew at side edge of the brim and sew the crown together. Before I covered the crown with fabric, I painted the top part with Elmer's Glue O. I was hoping to glue the fabric to the top part of the crown, but it did not stick at all. But it helped to stiffen the base, so maybe next time I will try to use the glue to stiffen the hat base. Once you arrange the fabric nicely over the base, fold the bottom seam allowance inside the crown and hand stitch it in place. I used button thread and prick stitch. Flip the brim fabric right side out and slide the brim base between the fabric. This was a little tricky to do, but having stretchy fabric really helped. I pushed all the seam allowances to one side, which is the side that's going to be on the bottom. So just inside the wire with running stitch to keep the fabric in place. Clip the seam allowances like this, and attach the brim to the crown by folding up the seam allowance on the inside of the crown and hand stitching it down. I realized that the seam allowance was too bulky, so I decided to cut off the seam allowances only from the interfacing. Hand stitches are visible from outside, but I'm going to put a ribbon band to cover them up. This is the Petersham ribbon often used in hat making. If you just put the ribbon like this, there are going to be some gaps at the top. The difference between Petersham ribbon and the regular grosgrain ribbon is that the Petersham has these ridges which are flexible, so you can mold Petersham ribbon with steam iron. After reshaping the Petersham into curved shape, the ribbon fits around the hat perfectly. I hand tacked at the bottom of the ribbon in a couple places. For the lining, I used brushed cotton. I used this Pellon interfacing instead of Buckram for the first time, and I did not know if it would work out or not. But I think my hat came out really well.